Lucas Reed stood frozen in his apartment doorway at 2 in the morning, his heart hammering against his ribs as 20-year-old Iris Bennett reached for his face with trembling hands. Behind him, his 6-year-old son slept peacefully, unaware that his father was about to make a choice that would haunt them both forever, or save them from a catastrophe neither could come back from. In that breathless moment between loneliness and disaster, between comfort and destruction, Lucas had to decide what kind of man he really was. If you want to know whether Lucas made the right choice, stay with me until the end of this story. And please, hit that like button and comment with the city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The Brooklyn apartment smelled like cardboard boxes and broken promises. Lucas Reed stood in the center of the living room, surveying the chaos of his new life with the kind of exhausted resignation that comes from fighting too long and losing anyway. Boxes labeled kitchen and Ethan's toys and miscellaneous sat stacked against walls that desperately needed paint. The afternoon light filtered through dirty windows, illuminating dust particles that hung in the air like tiny monuments to everything that had fallen apart. "Daddy, is this our house now?" Lucas turned to find his son standing in the doorway of what would become his bedroom, clutching the stuffed elephant he'd had since he was 2. Ethan was 6 years old, small for his age, with his mother's dark eyes and Lucas's tendency to worry about things he couldn't control. "Yeah, buddy," Lucas said, forcing brightness into his voice that he didn't feel. "This is home now. What do you think?" Ethan looked around with the serious expression he'd been wearing too often lately, the one that made him look like a tiny old man carrying the weight of adult problems. "It's smaller than before." "It is," Lucas admitted, because he'd learned that lying to Ethan about the obvious things only made the kid trust him less about everything else. "But it's ours, just you and me. We're going to make it work." Ethan nodded, still clutching the elephant. "Can I pick which room is mine?" "The one on the left is yours. I already put your bed in there." The boy disappeared into his new room, and Lucas heard him talking to the elephant in the quiet voice he used when he was trying to be brave. The sound cracked something open in Lucas's chest that he quickly shoved back down, because he didn't have time to fall apart. He had 3 hours to unpack enough boxes to make the place livable before he had to pick up his weekend shift at the warehouse, and his ex-wife had already texted twice to remind him that if he couldn't handle basic parenting responsibilities, she'd be happy to revisit their custody arrangement. He was pulling dishes from a box labeled fragile when he heard the knock. Lucas opened the door to find a young woman standing in the hallway, holding a casserole dish wrapped in aluminum foil. She was maybe 20, 21, with long dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and the kind of careful smile that suggested she'd rehearsed this moment. "Hi," she said. "I'm Iris. I live next door, apartment 3B. I saw you moving in and thought you might want something that doesn't require unpacking boxes to eat." Lucas stared at her for a moment, genuinely surprised by the gesture. In his experience, neighbors in Brooklyn didn't bring casseroles to strangers. They avoided eye contact in elevators and complained about noise through passive-aggressive notes slipped under doors. "That's really kind of you," he said, taking the dish. It was still warm. "Thank you. I'm Lucas. Lucas Reed." "Nice to meet you, Lucas." Her eyes flicked past him into the apartment, taking in the boxes and chaos. "Big move?" "Fresh start," he said, which was the polite way of saying his marriage had imploded, and he was now a 30-year-old single father living in a 2-bedroom apartment that cost more than his warehouse job could really afford. "Me and my son." "How old?" 6. Something shifted in Iris's expression, a softness that hadn't been there before. "That's a good age. Still believes in magic." "Most days," Lucas said. "Other days he just believes his parents screwed everything up." The words came out more bitter than he'd intended, and he saw Iris register the edge in his voice. She didn't flinch, though. Instead, she nodded like she understood something about the particular flavor of his exhaustion. "Well, if you need anything, sugar, Wi-Fi password, someone to watch him for an hour while you finish unpacking, I'm right next door. I'm usually home in the evenings. I'm a student at NYU, but my schedule's pretty flexible." "I appreciate that," Lucas said, meaning it. "Really? This is really nice." Iris smiled, and this time it looked less rehearsed. "Welcome to the building, Lucas." She disappeared back into her apartment, and Lucas closed the door, staring down at the casserole dish in his hands. When was the last time a stranger had done something kind for him without wanting anything in return? He couldn't remember. The divorce had taught him that everyone kept a running tally of debts and favors, that kindness was just currency people spent when they wanted something later. But maybe not everyone. Maybe this girl was just nice. "Daddy, who was that?" Ethan had emerged from his room, looking curious. "Our neighbor. She brought us dinner." "What is it?" Lucas lifted the foil and discovered what looked like baked ziti, the cheese still bubbling at the edges. His stomach growled. He'd been living on coffee and granola bars for 3 days. "Pasta," he said. "You hungry?" "Yeah." They ate sitting on the floor, surrounded by boxes, using paper plates because Lucas hadn't unpacked the real ones yet. Ethan talked about his new room, about the park he'd seen from the window, about whether his mom would let him bring his bike next time he visited her. Lucas listened and made encouraging sounds and tried not to think about how his son had learned to talk around the uncomfortable silences. How a 6-year-old had already developed the emotional vocabulary to navigate his parents' failure. After dinner, Lucas got Ethan ready for bed, reading him 2 chapters of the book they'd been working through about a mouse who went on adventures. When his son finally fell asleep, Lucas stood in the doorway watching him breathe, feeling the familiar mixture of love and terror that came with being solely responsible for another human being. Then he went back to unpacking, working in the quiet apartment until exhaustion finally pulled him under. The first few weeks in the new place passed in a blur of routine and adjustment. Lucas worked the night shift at a warehouse in Red Hook, loading and unloading trucks in a vast space that smelled like diesel and cardboard. The work was mindless and physically exhausting, which he actually preferred. It meant he didn't have time to think about everything that had gone wrong, about the future he'd planned that had evaporated like water on hot pavement. During the day, he was dad. He got Ethan to school, picked him up, helped with homework, made dinner, enforced bedtime. He attended the parent-teacher conferences his ex-wife couldn't be bothered with, and learned the names of the other parents who lingered at pickup, trading small talk about snacks and screen time while carefully avoiding anything too personal. He was tired all the time, bone-deep, soul-crushing tired. But he kept moving because that's what you did when you had a kid depending on you. Iris became a familiar presence in the building, someone he'd pass in the hallway or bump into at the mailboxes. She always smiled, always asked how Ethan was doing, always seemed genuinely interested in the answer. Sometimes she'd bring over leftovers. "I made too much," she'd say, though Lucas suspected she was cooking specifically for them. He tried to refuse at first, worried about being a charity case, but she just laughed and told him he was doing her a favor by keeping her from eating pasta for 5 days straight. "I'm a terrible cook," she'd explain one evening when she'd brought over what she called experimental stir-fry that was actually delicious. "I follow recipes exactly, and somehow everything still turns out weird. But every now and then I nail something, and then I get overconfident and make way too much." "This is really good," Lucas had said, because it was. Beginner's luck. She'd lingered in the doorway, looking uncertain about something. "Hey, I know this is kind of forward, but I'm around most evenings if you ever need someone to keep an eye on Ethan for an hour or two. No charge or anything. I like kids, and I could use the distraction from studying." Lucas had hesitated. He didn't like asking for help, didn't like owing people favors, but he also desperately needed a haircut and had been putting it off for weeks because coordinating childcare with his ex-wife required 3 days of hostile text negotiations. "Are you sure?" he'd asked. "I don't want to impose." "You're not imposing. I'm offering. There's a difference." So he'd said yes, and she'd watched Ethan one Thursday evening while Lucas got a haircut that made him look slightly less like someone who'd given up on personal grooming. When he'd come back, he'd found them sitting on the floor building an elaborate Lego city, both of them completely absorbed in the project. "Your son is a master architect," Iris had said, standing up and brushing off her jeans. "He explained the entire sewage system to me. Very thorough." Ethan had beamed with pride, and Lucas had felt something unexpected. Gratitude, yes, but also something else. Relief. The sense that maybe they weren't completely alone in this new life. After that, it became easier to accept Iris's help. She'd watch Ethan once or twice a week, usually just for an hour while Lucas ran errands or dealt with the administrative nightmare of his divorce. She never asked for payment, though he tried to give it. Instead, she'd just say, "Buy me a coffee sometime," and disappear back into her apartment before he could argue. The coffee happened on a Saturday afternoon in early November. Lucas had the weekend off, and Ethan was at his mother's place for their court-mandated visitation. The apartment felt too quiet without his son's constant motion and chatter, so when Iris had texted asking if he wanted to grab coffee, he'd said yes immediately, grateful for something to fill the empty hours. They met at a small cafe 3 blocks from the building, the kind of place with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. Iris was already there when he arrived, sitting at a corner table with a book open in front of her. "What are you reading?" Lucas asked as he sat down. She tilted the cover toward him. Sociology textbook, riveting stuff about demographic shifts and urban planning. "Sounds like a party." "Oh, it is. Nothing says Saturday fun like reading about gentrification patterns." She closed the book and looked at him with that direct gaze he'd noticed before, the one that made him feel like she was actually seeing him rather than just looking in his general direction. "How are you holding up?" The question caught him off guard. Most people asked how he was doing as a formality, a social nicety that didn't require an honest answer, but Iris asked like she meant it. "I'm okay," he said automatically, then reconsidered. "Actually, I'm exhausted and stressed and worried I'm screwing up my kid's life, but other than that, great." Iris smiled, but there was sadness in it. Single parenting looks brutal. It has its moments. He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup, grateful for the warmth. "Sorry, I'm not usually this honest with near strangers." "We're not strangers anymore. We're neighbors. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Absolutely. Strangers don't know what your kid's laugh sounds like, or that you listen to really terrible dad rock at exactly 6 in the morning when you're making breakfast." Lucas felt his face get hot. "The walls are that thin?" "Don't worry, I like classic rock. Very nostalgic." She took a sip of her coffee. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. Do you have any friends? Like, actual friends you talk to?" The question should have felt intrusive, but somehow it didn't. Maybe because he'd been asking himself the same thing. "I used to," he said slowly, "but most of them were couple friends, people my ex-wife and I hung out with together. After the divorce, they chose sides, I guess, or just got uncomfortable with the whole situation. I don't know. I stopped getting invited to things. That's shitty." "It is what it is." He shrugged, trying to act like it didn't bother him, but he could tell from Iris's expression that she wasn't buying it. "What about you? I never see you with anyone." Something flickered across her face, there and gone so fast he almost missed it. "I'm not great at making friends. I'm better at being alone." "By choice?" "Mostly." She looked down at her coffee. "I grew up in Connecticut, suburbs, big house, nice schools, parents who stayed married and did all the right things on paper. But my dad was distant. Still is. He's there physically, but emotionally he's just gone. Like living with a very polite stranger who happens to pay the bills." Lucas didn't say anything, sensing she needed space to keep talking. "My mom tried to compensate for it," Iris continued. "She was always hovering, always asking how I was doing, but it felt performative, you know? Like she was checking boxes on some invisible list of good parenting. Neither of them ever really saw me. I was just this thing they'd created that they had to maintain until I turned 18 and could maintain myself." "That sounds lonely," Lucas said quietly. "It was. It is." She looked up at him. "That's why I moved here for school. I needed to be somewhere I could figure out who I am without them projecting their expectations onto me every second. But turns out being alone in a big city is just a different kind of lonely." Lucas understood that feeling in his bones. The loneliness that came from being surrounded by millions of people and still feeling invisible. "I get that," he said. "After my divorce, I kept waiting for life to feel less heavy. Like once the legal stuff was done and we'd divided everything up, I'd wake up one morning and feel lighter. But it didn't happen. If anything, it got worse, because at least when we were fighting, I wasn't alone." Iris nodded slowly. "My therapist says loneliness is an epidemic, that we're all walking around starving for real connection, but we've forgotten how to actually reach for each other." "You're in therapy?" Yeah, started last year when I realized I was spending entire weekends in my apartment without talking to another human being. She laughed, but it sounded hollow. Pathetic, right? Not pathetic. Smart. I should probably be in therapy. Why aren't you? Time, money, pride. He ticked them off on his fingers. Take your pick. Those are all terrible reasons. They're the reasons I've got. They sat in silence for a moment, and Lucas realized he felt more comfortable with this near stranger than he had with anyone in months. There was something about Iris that made it easy to be honest, to drop the performance of being fine and just exist in his messy reality. Thanks for this, he said finally. I didn't realize how much I needed to talk to another adult about something other than custody schedules and whether Ethan is eating enough vegetables. Any time, Iris said, and he believed her. They finished their coffee and walked back to the building together, talking about nothing important, her classes, his job, the new restaurant that had opened down the street. When they reached their floor, Iris paused outside her door. Hey, Lucas. Yeah? I'm really glad you moved in next door. Something in her voice made him look at her more carefully. She was smiling, but there was a vulnerability in her eyes that reminded him of Ethan when he was trying to be brave about something that scared him. Me too, he said, and meant it. She disappeared into her apartment, and Lucas went into his own, suddenly aware of how quiet it was without Ethan. He tried to read, tried to watch TV, but everything felt flat and hollow. Finally, he gave up and went to bed early, staring at the ceiling and thinking about loneliness and connection and the strange comfort he'd found in talking to a girl who was young enough to be his daughter if he'd made very different choices. November slid into December, and the building transformed. Someone put up holiday lights in the lobby. The super hung a wreath on the front door. Ethan came home from school talking about Christmas concerts and winter break and what he wanted Santa to bring him, his excitement contagious even as Lucas mentally calculated whether he could afford the Lego set his son had his heart set on. His ex-wife had decided to spend the holidays with her new boyfriend in Florida, which meant Lucas had Ethan for 2 straight weeks. Part of him resented the disruption to their normal schedule. Another part was grateful for the extra time with his son, for not having to split Christmas morning into awkward timed segments. Iris had mentioned she was staying in the city for break. Her parents were traveling, she'd said, and she didn't feel like going home to an empty house. Lucas had invited her to have dinner with them on Christmas Eve, and she'd accepted with obvious relief. She showed up at 6 with a pie she'd attempted to make herself and a wrapped present for Ethan. You didn't have to do that, Lucas said, but Iris just shrugged. I wanted to. I like your kid. Ethan tore into the present with the kind of enthusiasm only small children could muster, revealing a book about space exploration with elaborate illustrations. This is so cool, he announced, immediately flopping onto the couch to start reading it. Dinner was simple: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans that Ethan picked at reluctantly. They ate at the small table Lucas had bought at a thrift store, and for a few hours the apartment felt less like a way station and more like a home. After dinner, Ethan insisted they all watch his favorite holiday movie, and they ended up on the couch with the kid wedged between them, fighting to stay awake as cartoon characters learned valuable lessons about the true meaning of Christmas. He's out, Iris whispered, nodding toward Ethan, who had slumped against Lucas's side, his mouth slightly open in sleep. Yeah. Lucas carefully shifted his son, trying not to wake him. I should get him to bed. He carried Ethan to his room, tucking him in and standing for a moment in the doorway, watching the rise and fall of his chest. No matter how hard things got, no matter how tired he was or how worried about money or the future, this part was never hard. Loving Ethan was the easiest thing he'd ever done. When he came back to the living room, Iris had cleaned up the dinner dishes and was standing by the window looking out at the street below. You didn't have to clean, Lucas said. I wanted to earn my keep. She turned to face him. Thanks for having me over. I would have spent tonight eating ramen and feeling sorry for myself otherwise. Thanks for coming. It's nice not to do holidays alone. You have Ethan. You're not alone. You know what I mean? Adult company. Someone to talk to about things other than Legos and dinosaurs. Iris smiled. I like hearing about Legos and dinosaurs. You're lying. Only a little. She grabbed her coat from the back of the chair. I should let you get some sleep. I know you work tomorrow night. Yeah, graveyard shift on Christmas. Living the dream. She hesitated, her hand on the doorknob. Lucas, can I ask you something? Sure. Do you ever feel like you're just going through the motions? Like you're doing all the right things, working, parenting, paying bills, but you've forgotten what it feels like to actually want something for yourself? The question hit him in a place he'd been carefully avoiding. Because yes, that was exactly how he felt. Like he'd become a function rather than a person, a collection of responsibilities and obligations with no space left for actual desires or dreams. Every day, he admitted. Does it get better? I don't know yet. Ask me in a year. Iris nodded, still not opening the door. I worry sometimes that I'm going to wake up at 40 and realize I spent my whole life just surviving, never actually living, just getting from one day to the next without ever asking myself what I want or who I want to be. You're 20. You have time to figure it out. Do I? Because it doesn't feel that way. It feels like every day I'm making choices that are closing off other choices, and I don't even know if they're the right ones. I'm in school studying sociology because it seemed practical, but I don't even know if I care about it. I'm in this city because I needed to leave home, but I don't have any actual plan for what comes next. I'm just drifting. Lucas heard the desperation in her voice, the fear underneath the words. He wanted to tell her it would all work out, that she'd find her way, but he didn't believe in empty reassurances anymore. I think everyone feels that way, he said instead. At 20, at 30, at 50. The feeling that you're supposed to have everything figured out and instead you're just improvising and hoping no one notices. Do you feel like you're improvising? Constantly. I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just trying not to screw up my kid too badly. You're doing a good job. He's happy. That's not nothing. Thanks. Lucas meant it. He didn't hear that kind of validation often, especially not from someone who didn't have an agenda. You should go get some sleep. And Iris? Yeah? You're going to figure it out. Maybe not on anyone else's timeline, but you'll get there. She looked at him for a long moment, and he saw something in her expression he couldn't quite name. Gratitude, maybe? Or longing? Or just the desperate hope that what he was saying was true. Good night, Lucas. Good night. She left, and Lucas stood in the empty living room, feeling the weight of the conversation settling over him. There was something about the way Iris looked at him sometimes that made him uncomfortable in a way he couldn't quite articulate. Like she was seeing something in him that wasn't really there. Like he represented something more than he actually was. He pushed the thought away and went to bed because he had work in the morning and only a few hours to sleep. But the thought lingered anyway, quiet and persistent, like a question he didn't want to answer. Winter deepened, and the rhythm of their lives fell into a pattern. Lucas worked, took care of Ethan, and tried to rebuild some semblance of a future from the wreckage of his marriage. Iris studied, brought over food she'd made too much of, and watched Ethan when Lucas needed help. They fell into an easy friendship, the kind built on proximity and shared loneliness rather than common interests or history. Sometimes Lucas would come home from work at 3 a.m. and see light under Iris's door, and he'd wonder what kept her up so late. Other times he'd hear her crying through the thin walls, quiet sobs that she tried to muffle, and he'd stand in his own apartment feeling helpless and invasive at the same time. He never mentioned it. It felt like crossing a line, acknowledging that he could hear her pain, but he started checking on her more often, casual questions about how she was doing that he hoped conveyed that he noticed, that he cared, without making her feel exposed. "I'm fine," she'd always say, with a brightness that felt rehearsed, "just stressed about school." He didn't believe her, but he also didn't push. Everyone was entitled to their private grief. January came, bitter and cold. Ethan caught a stomach bug that kept him home from school for 3 days, which meant Lucas had to miss work and deal with his boss's thinly veiled threats about reliability. His ex-wife texted to say she was thinking about moving to Florida permanently with her boyfriend, which would mean renegotiating custody and probably legal fees Lucas couldn't afford. Everything felt like it was held together with duct tape and prayers. One Thursday evening in mid-January, Lucas was making dinner when he heard a knock. He opened the door to find Iris standing in the hallway, and he could immediately tell something was wrong. Her eyes were red, her face blotchy from crying. "Hey," he said, stepping aside instinctively. What happened? She came in without being asked, wrapping her arms around herself like she was trying to hold something together. I'm sorry. I know you're busy. I couldn't be alone right now. It's okay. Ethan's doing homework. What's going on? Iris sat on the couch and Lucas sat across from her, giving her space. I called my parents today, she said finally. I told them I'm thinking about dropping out of school, that I don't know what I'm doing with my life, and I feel like I'm wasting their money studying something I don't care about. What did they say? My dad asked if I'd thought about the financial implications. Like that was the only thing that mattered. Not whether I was okay, not whether I was happy. Just whether it made fiscal sense. Her voice cracked. And my mom she started talking about how much they'd sacrifice to send me to NYU, how disappointed they'd be if I threw away this opportunity. Like my entire value as a person is tied to whether I finished this degree. Lucas didn't say anything. Sometimes people didn't need solutions. They just needed someone to sit with them in the mess. I feel so fucking invisible, Iris continued, the words tumbling out now like she couldn't hold them back anymore. Like I could disappear tomorrow and it wouldn't actually matter to anyone. My parents would be disappointed about the money, but they wouldn't miss me. Not really. I don't have friends here. I don't have a purpose. I'm just taking up space. That's not true. Isn't it? She looked at him with raw, desperate eyes. What do I contribute to the world, Lucas? What difference does my existence make? You matter to me, he said, and realized as he said it how much he meant it. You matter to Ethan. You're the only person in this building who even knows our names, who gives a damn about whether we're okay. That's not nothing. That's just proximity. You'd feel the same way about anyone who was convenient. No, I wouldn't. He leaned forward, trying to make her hear him. You're kind, Iris. You're thoughtful. You notice things other people don't. You brought us dinner when we moved in because you saw we needed help, not because you wanted something from us. You watch my kid not for money, but because you genuinely like spending time with him. That matters. You matter. She was crying again, quietly, and Lucas felt something shift in the room, a weight he hadn't noticed before suddenly pressing down on both of them. Sometimes I think you're the only person who actually sees me, Iris said softly. The only one who asks how I am and means it. Who listens when I talk instead of just waiting for their turn. Who treats me like I'm a real person instead of just an obligation. Warning bells went off in Lucas's head, quiet but insistent. Your parents love you, he said carefully. They might not be great at showing it, but that doesn't mean, do they? Because it doesn't feel like love. It feels like duty, like I'm just another item on their to-do list. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. But you're different. You make me feel like I exist. Iris, I know this is inappropriate, she said quickly. I know you probably think I'm some messed up kid with daddy issues who latched onto the first older guy who was nice to her. And maybe that's true. But I also think we understand each other. We're both lonely. We both know what it's like to feel invisible. That's real, isn't it? That connection? Lucas felt like he was standing at the edge of something dangerous, a drop-off he couldn't see the bottom of. You're going through something really hard right now, he said, keeping his voice steady. You're questioning everything, feeling lost, and that makes sense. But I can't be what you're looking for. I'm your neighbor, your friend, I hope, but that's all I can be. Why? You know why? Because I'm 20 and you're 30? That's part of it, yeah. That's just a number. It's not just a number. It's a decade of life experience. It's a completely different stage of development. You're still figuring out who you are. I'm a divorced single father trying to keep my head above water. We're in different worlds. But we're both alone. And there it was. The thing he'd been trying not to acknowledge. They were both desperately, achingly alone. Two people drowning in isolation who'd found each other by accident. The temptation to reach across that loneliness, to pretend it was something more than just proximity and timing, was stronger than he wanted to admit. Being alone doesn't mean we should make bad choices, Lucas said quietly. Is this a bad choice? Wanting to be close to someone who actually gives a damn about you? Yes. Because I'm not what you think I am. I'm not some wise older guy who has his shit together. I'm a mess, Iris. I'm barely keeping it together. If you're looking for someone to save you from your loneliness, I can't be that person. I'm drowning too. Iris stood up abruptly, and Lucas could see the humiliation creeping into her expression, the realization of what she'd just exposed. I should go, she said. I'm sorry, this was stupid. Forget I said anything. Iris, wait. But she was already at the door, already leaving. She disappeared into her apartment without looking back, and Lucas sat alone in his living room feeling like he'd just narrowly avoided a catastrophe he still didn't fully understand. Ethan appeared in the doorway, looking worried. Is Miss Iris okay? She's going through something hard, Lucas said, but she'll be all right. He hoped that was true. But sitting there in the quiet apartment, thinking about the look in Iris's eyes and the weight of loneliness that pushed people toward each other in ways that couldn't be sustained, Lucas wasn't sure of anything anymore. The silence that followed was worse than any argument. For 3 days, Lucas didn't see Iris. He heard her come and go, the familiar sound of her door opening and closing, but their paths didn't cross. He told himself it was coincidence, just bad timing, but he knew better. She was avoiding him, and he couldn't blame her. He'd replayed their conversation 100 times, analyzing every word, every gesture, trying to figure out if he'd handled it right. Part of him wondered if he should have been gentler, more understanding. Another part knew he'd done the only thing he could do, draw a line before it got crossed. But the apartment felt emptier now. He caught himself listening for her footsteps in the hallway, noticed the absence of her casual knocks and surprise meals. Even Ethan had asked twice where Miss Iris had gone, why she didn't come over anymore. She's busy with school, Lucas had said, which wasn't technically a lie, but felt like one anyway. On the 4th day, he found a note slipped under his door. The handwriting was careful, controlled, like she'd written it several times before settling on this version. Lucas, I'm sorry about the other night. I was having a breakdown and I put you in an impossible position. That wasn't fair. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, and you're right. I was looking for someone to fix something in me that I need to fix myself. Thank you for being honest even when it was uncomfortable. I hope we can still be friends, but I understand if that's too weird now. Either way, I'm grateful you moved in next door. Iris. Lucas read it 3 times, feeling the weight of everything she wasn't saying. The humiliation, the loneliness, the desperate hope that she hadn't ruined the one genuine connection she'd made in this city. He knocked on her door that evening after putting Ethan to bed. Iris answered wearing sweatpants and an oversized NYU hoodie, her hair pulled up in a messy bun. She looked tired, smaller somehow, like the conversation had taken something out of her she hadn't gotten back yet. Hey, she said quietly. Hey, can we talk? She stepped aside to let him in, and Lucas found himself in her apartment for the first time. It was almost identical to his in layout, but completely different in feel. Where his place was cluttered with Ethan's toys and moving boxes he still hadn't unpacked, hers was sparse, almost sterile. A couch, a coffee table with textbooks stacked neatly, a small dining table with 1 chair. The walls were bare except for a single-frame poster from an art exhibit. It looked like a place someone was camping in rather than living. I got your note, Lucas said. I meant what I wrote. I'm sorry. I know, and I'm sorry too. I should have seen what was happening, should have been more careful about boundaries. Iris sat on the couch, tucking her legs under her. You didn't do anything wrong. I'm the one who made it weird. You didn't make it weird. You were honest about what you were feeling. That takes courage. Or stupidity. No. Honesty. Lucas stayed standing, keeping some distance between them. I want you to know that I meant what I said. You do matter. You matter to me and to Ethan, but I also meant the other part. I can't be what you're looking for because I'm barely holding my own life together. I'm not the answer to your loneliness. I know that now. She looked down at her hands. I've been thinking about what you said about making bad choices because I'm lonely, and you're right. I've spent so long feeling invisible that when someone actually sees me, I don't know how to handle it. I turn it into something it isn't. That's not a character flaw, Iris. That's just being human. Maybe. But I need to figure out how to see myself instead of waiting for other people to do it for me. She looked up at him. I'm going to start seeing my therapist more regularly, twice a week instead of once. and I'm going to try to actually make friends at school instead of just going to class and coming straight home. That sounds good. I don't want to lose you as a friend, Lucas, but I also understand if you need space. He thought about it. The easy thing would be to create distance to avoid the messiness and potential complications. But Iris was still his neighbor, still someone who'd shown him kindness when he desperately needed it. And more than that, he genuinely cared about whether she was okay. I don't need space, he said. But maybe we both need to be more careful. Clear boundaries, you know? Like what? Like you're welcome to come over when Ethan's home, but maybe not late at night when it's just me. Like we're friends, which means I care about you, but I'm not your emotional support system. You need to build that with other people too, not just rely on me. Iris nodded slowly. That's fair. What else? I think that's it. Just, we both need to remember what this is. Neighbors who became friends. Nothing more complicated than that. Okay? She smiled, and it looked genuine. I can do that. Good. Lucas felt something loosen in his chest, relief mixed with the kind of cautious hope that came from narrowly avoiding disaster. So we're okay. We're okay. He left feeling like they'd navigated something dangerous and come out the other side mostly intact. But walking back to his apartment, Lucas couldn't shake the nagging feeling that he'd only postponed something rather than resolved it. The following week settled into a new normal that felt both familiar and strange. Iris still came over, but always when Ethan was home, and she never stayed late. They were careful with each other in a way they hadn't been before, both of them hyper-aware of boundaries and potential landmines. The easy comfort they'd had was gone, replaced by something more deliberate and controlled. Lucas told himself this was better, safer, but he missed the simplicity of before, when he could just enjoy her company without analyzing every interaction. Work became his refuge, the mindless physical labor a welcome distraction from the complicated emotional terrain of his personal life. He picked up extra shifts when he could, telling himself it was about the money, but knowing it was also about having fewer hours to sit alone in his apartment and overthink everything. His ex-wife made good on her threat to move to Florida, which meant Lucas now had primary custody of Ethan during the school year, and summers alternating with extended visits to his mother. The custody lawyer Lucas couldn't afford assured him this was a good outcome, but it felt like just another weight added to the pile he was already carrying. February came, gray and relentless. The city was locked in that particular kind of winter misery where spring felt impossibly distant and every day was just a variation of cold and wet and dark. Lucas trudged through it, getting Ethan to school, going to work, maintaining the routines that kept them both afloat. One Thursday evening in late February, he came home from the grocery store to find Ethan and Iris sitting at the kitchen table working on a science project. He'd forgotten she was watching him. He'd texted her in a panic that morning when his usual after-school arrangement had fallen through, and she'd agreed immediately. "Dad, look what Miss Iris helped me build." Ethan held up what appeared to be a volcano made from papier-mâché and paint. "That's impressive, buddy. Is it going to erupt?" "Tomorrow at school, Miss Iris showed me how to make the lava with baking soda and vinegar." "She's very smart," Lucas said, catching Iris's eye. She looked happy, more relaxed than he'd seen her in weeks. After Ethan went to bed, Iris lingered in the doorway like she had something on her mind. "Everything okay?" Lucas asked. "Yeah, I wanted to tell you that I've been taking your advice about making friends. I joined this study group in one of my classes, and I've actually been hanging out with some of them outside of school. Coffee, movies, normal college stuff." "That's great, Iris. Really." "It's weird," she admitted. "I'm not used to having people who want to spend time with me just because they like me. But it's good weird. Like I'm learning how to be a person instead of just a ghost moving through spaces." "You were never a ghost." "I felt like one. But I'm working on it." She smiled. "Thank you for being honest with me even when it sucked to hear." "Anytime." She left, and Lucas cleaned up the kitchen, thinking about growth and change and the strange way people could impact each other's lives without even meaning to. He'd been so focused on his own survival that he hadn't noticed he was helping someone else learn to live. March arrived with the first hints of warmth, those teasing days where the sun actually felt like it had some strength and the air didn't cut through your coat quite so viciously. The The city started to thaw, both literally and metaphorically, and Lucas felt something shift in himself, too. A loosening of the constant tension he'd been carrying since the divorce. He started sleeping better, eating better, taking Ethan to the park on weekends instead of just parking him in front of the TV while Lucas dealt with laundry and bills. Small improvements that added up to something that almost felt like healing. Iris seemed to be doing better too. She had people now, friends who would stop by her apartment or call her to make plans. Lucas would hear them in the hallway, young voices laughing and making the kind of noise that came from genuine connection. He was happy for her, relieved that she'd found her people. But he also noticed how sometimes she still looked at him with something that made him uncomfortable. Not the desperate neediness from before, but something else. A wistfulness, maybe. A question she wasn't asking. He tried to ignore it, to focus on the fact that they'd successfully navigated a difficult situation and come out the other side as friends. But ignoring something didn't make it disappear. One Saturday in mid-March, Ethan was at a birthday party and Lucas had a rare afternoon off. He was fixing a leaky faucet in the kitchen, cursing at rusty pipes and inadequate tools, when Iris knocked. "Need help?" she asked when he opened the door, taking in his frustrated expression and the wrench in his hand. "Unless you're secretly a plumber, probably not." "I'm not a plumber, but I'm good at Googling solutions to problems. Let me see." They ended up in the kitchen together, Iris reading instructions from a YouTube video on her phone while Lucas followed along, and within 20 minutes they'd actually fixed the leak. "I can't believe that worked," Lucas said, staring at the faucet like it had personally betrayed him by being so simple. The internet is magic. Iris hopped up to sit on the counter, looking pleased with herself. "So what are you doing with your kid-free afternoon now that you're not wrestling with plumbing?" "I don't know. I hadn't thought that far ahead. Maybe take a nap." That's the saddest answer I've ever heard. Welcome to single parenthood. When you get free time, you sleep. "Or," Iris said, "you could do something fun. When was the last time you did something just because you wanted to, not because you had to?" Lucas tried to remember and couldn't. Before the divorce, probably. "That's like 2 years ago. Sounds about right." "Okay, new plan? We're going out." "Iris, not like that. As friends." "You said we needed to be clear about boundaries, and this is within them, right? Two friends hanging out on a Saturday afternoon. You need to remember what it's like to be a person instead of just a dad." She had a point. He'd been so focused on Ethan and work and basic survival that he'd forgotten he was allowed to have experiences that were just for him. Where would we even go? "I don't know. Surprise me. What did you used to like doing before your life fell apart?" The question should have stung, but Iris asked it with such matter-of-fact directness that it just felt honest. "I used to go to museums," Lucas said slowly, pulling up a memory from what felt like another lifetime. "Art museums, history museums, that weird transit museum in Brooklyn. My ex-wife hated it, said it was boring, but I liked just wandering around looking at stuff." "Perfect. Let's go to a museum." "Right now?" "Right now. Come on, Lucas. Live a little." 20 minutes later, they were on the subway heading to the Met, and Lucas felt something he hadn't felt in months. Anticipation. The sense that something good might happen, that the day held possibility instead of just obligation. The museum was crowded with tourists and school groups, but Lucas didn't mind. They wandered through the Egyptian wing, making up stories about the artifacts. They got lost in the medieval armor collection, debating which pieces they'd want if they had to fight a dragon. They stood in front of paintings neither of them understood but both of them liked, talking about color and composition and what the artist might have been feeling when they made it. It was easy, comfortable. The kind of afternoon that didn't demand anything except presence. They stopped at a cafe in Central Park afterward, sitting at a small table with overpriced coffee and watching people pass by. "Thank you for this," Lucas said. "I didn't realize how much I needed it." "You spend all your time taking care of other people. You forget to take care of yourself." Occupational hazard of parenting. Maybe. But you're allowed to have a life too, you know. You're allowed to want things. What if I don't know what I want anymore? Iris looked at him with those dark, serious eyes that always seemed to see more than he wanted to show. "Then you start small. You figure out what makes you feel alive, even for an hour, and you do more of that. Is that what you're doing? Trying to. It's harder than it sounds. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. I've spent so long just trying to survive my family's expectations and my own loneliness that I don't have a clear sense of who I am when I'm not just reacting to all that. My therapist says I need to develop a stronger sense of self, but I don't even know where to start. What do you like? What makes you happy? She thought about it. I like learning about people. Not in a creepy way, but in a sociology way. I like understanding why people do what they do, what motivates them, what they're afraid of. I like the moments when someone lets their guard down and shows you who they really are underneath all the performance. That's why you're studying sociology? Sort of. I picked it because it seemed practical, but the more I study it, the more I realize it's actually what I care about. Understanding human connection, or the lack of it. Why some people can build relationships easily and others struggle. What makes communities work or fall apart. You're good at it, Lucas said. Understanding people, I mean. You saw me struggling when we first met, and you showed up with food and kindness. That's not nothing. I saw someone who looked like I felt, alone, trying to hold everything together with sheer willpower. She paused. Can I ask you something? Sure. Do you think we would have become friends if we weren't both so lonely? It was a good question, one Lucas had wondered about himself. I don't know, maybe not. But does it matter? We did become friends. The circumstances that brought us together don't invalidate what we built. Even if the foundation is kind of sad? Especially then. Sometimes the best things come from the worst circumstances. You learn who you can count on when everything's falling apart. Iris smiled, but there was something melancholy in it. I'm going to miss this when I leave. The words hit Lucas like cold water. Leave? Where are you going? I'm thinking about doing a semester abroad in the fall. Amsterdam. There's a program through NYU that focuses on urban sociology and migration patterns. I haven't decided for sure, but I'm seriously considering it. That sounds amazing. You should do it. I know, but it also means leaving behind the one stable thing I've built here. She met his eyes. I'm going to miss you and Ethan. We'll miss you too. But you can't not do things because you'll miss people. That's not living. That's just being afraid. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just tired of being afraid. He meant it. The divorce had taught him that you couldn't protect yourself from loss by avoiding connection. Life found ways to hurt you anyway. The only choice was whether you participated in it fully or spent your whole life holding back. They finished their coffee and walked back through the park, talking about nothing important, just existing together in the afternoon light. When they reached the subway station, Iris turned to him. Thank you for today. I had fun. Me too. We should do it again sometime. As friends? As friends. She nodded, and Lucas saw her swallow something she'd been about to say. He wondered what it was, but he didn't ask. Some things were better left unspoken. When he got home, Ethan was already back from the birthday party, delivered by another parent who'd given Lucas a look that suggested he should be more reliable about pickup times. He apologized and got Ethan ready for bed, going through the familiar routine that grounded him. But later, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, Lucas thought about the afternoon, about how easy it had been, how natural, about the way Iris looked at him sometimes like he was something more than he was, about the danger of lonely people finding comfort in each other. He was playing with fire, and he knew it. The smart thing would be to create more distance, to protect them both from the inevitable complications. But he was so tired of always doing the smart thing, the safe thing, the responsible thing. Just once, he wanted to have something that was his, something that made him feel human instead of just functional. He fell asleep still arguing with himself, knowing he was rationalizing something that probably couldn't be rationalized, but doing it anyway. The weeks that followed felt like walking a tightrope. Lucas and Iris maintained their friendship, but there was an undercurrent to it now, something unspoken that hummed beneath their casual conversations. He told himself he was imagining it, projecting his own confusion onto her, but he didn't really believe that. She started coming over more often again, always with Ethan present, always careful to maintain the boundaries they'd agreed on. But Lucas noticed the small things. The way she'd touch his arm when she was making a point, the way she'd look at him when she thought he wasn't paying attention, the way she'd linger in doorways like she was waiting for something. He didn't acknowledge it, didn't address it, because addressing it would mean having another difficult conversation, and he was so tired of difficult conversations. April came, and with it, Ethan's 7th birthday. Lucas threw a small party at the apartment, inviting a few kids from school and their parents. Iris showed up early to help set up, and she stayed late to clean up after everyone else had gone home. That was exhausting, Lucas said, collapsing on the couch after finally getting Ethan to bed. Why do children have so much energy? Because they haven't been beaten down by life yet, Iris said, sitting next to him, not touching, but close enough that he could feel her warmth. Cheerful thought. I'm a sociology major. We specialize in depressing observations about society. Lucas laughed and Iris smiled, and for a moment everything felt simple again. Just two people who understood each other, sitting in comfortable silence. I've been thinking about what you said, Iris said quietly, about doing the study abroad program. And? I'm going to do it. I submitted my application yesterday. That's great, Iris, really. I'm terrified. That's how you know it's the right choice. If it didn't scare you, it wouldn't be worth doing. She turned to look at him, and Lucas saw something in her expression that made his heart rate pick up. You make me brave. You know that, right? Talking to you, being around you, it makes me feel like I can do hard things. That's all you, not me. No, it's both of us. She shifted closer, and Lucas knew he should move away, but he didn't. Lucas, can I be honest with you about something? You're always honest with me. Not about this. She took a breath. I know we have boundaries. I know we agreed to be just friends. And I've tried. I really have. I've gone to therapy. I've made other friends. I've done all the things I'm supposed to do to build a healthy life. But I can't stop thinking about you. Iris, let me finish, please. Her voice was shaking slightly. I'm not asking you to do anything about it. I'm not trying to put you in a bad position. I just need you to know that what I feel for you isn't some daddy issue projection or loneliness talking. It's real. You're the first person who's ever made me feel like I matter, like my thoughts and feelings are worth paying attention to. And I know the age difference is a problem. I know the timing is terrible. I know all the rational reasons this doesn't make sense. But feelings don't care about rational reasons. Lucas felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. He'd known this was coming, had felt it building for weeks, but hearing it said out loud made it impossible to ignore. What do you want me to say? He asked quietly. I don't know. The truth, I guess. The truth. What was the truth? That he cared about her more than was probably appropriate? That sometimes when she smiled at him, he felt something he had no right to feel? That he'd thought about what it might be like to cross that line, had imagined it in ways that made him feel guilty and ashamed? The truth is complicated, Lucas said finally. Try anyway. He stood up, needing distance, needing to think. The truth is that you matter to me, more than I expected. More than is probably smart. And yes, sometimes when I'm around you, I feel things that complicate the friendship we're supposed to have. But that doesn't mean we should act on it. Why not? Because I'm 30 years old and you're 20, because I'm your neighbor and your friend, and I have a responsibility not to take advantage of your trust. Because you're at the beginning of your life, and I'm in the wreckage of mine, and mixing those things together would be a disaster for both of us. What if you're wrong? What if this is something real, and we're throwing it away because we're too scared to try? Then we're being smart instead of stupid. He turned to face her. Iris, listen to me. In 6 months, you're going to be in Amsterdam meeting new people and having experiences that will change how you see the world. You're going to look back on this conversation and be grateful I didn't let you make a choice you'd regret. You don't know that. I do, because I've lived longer than you, because I know what it's like to make decisions based on loneliness and desperation instead of genuine compatibility, because I care about you too much to let you settle for something that's just convenient. Tears were running down her face now, and Lucas felt his own eyes burning. I should go, she whispered. Iris, wait. But she was already leaving, and this time he didn't stop her. He let her go because it was the right thing to do, even though every instinct screamed at him to follow her, to take back his words, to give her what she wanted because he was so tired of being alone. He stood in his empty apartment listening to her cry through the walls, feeling like the worst person in the world, knowing he'd done the right thing and hating himself for it anyway. The silence between their apartments became a physical thing, heavy and suffocating. Lucas didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed replaying the conversation, questioning every word, every choice, wondering if he was being noble or just a coward. Morning came gray and indifferent, and he dragged himself through the routine of getting Ethan ready for school, his mind elsewhere. "Are you mad at Miss Iris?" Ethan asked over breakfast, picking at his cereal. Lucas looked up sharply. "What makes you think that?" "She hasn't come over in a while, and you look sad when I talk about her." "I'm not mad at her, buddy. Sometimes adults need space from each other. It's complicated." "That's what Mom used to say before you got divorced." The observation hit harder than it should have. Lucas set down his coffee cup carefully. "This isn't like that. Miss Iris and I are friends who just need a little break from each other. Sometimes that happens." Ethan didn't look convinced, but he nodded and went back to his cereal. Lucas finished getting him ready and dropped him at school, then went home to the empty apartment and stared at the walls. He could hear Iris moving around next door, the familiar sounds of her morning routine. He wondered if she'd slept, if she was as miserable as he was, if she hated him now. The next few days crawled by in painful slow motion. Lucas went to work, took care of Ethan, avoided his apartment as much as possible because being there meant being constantly aware of Iris's proximity. He picked up extra shifts, stayed late at the warehouse, anything to fill the hours that would otherwise be spent thinking about her. On the fourth day, he found another note under his door. "I'm sorry for putting you in that position. You were right about everything, and I should have respected the boundaries we set. I think I need some real distance to get my head straight. I'm going to visit my parents for a few weeks. Take care of yourself and Ethan." Lucas read it 3 times, each word feeling like a small cut. She was running, and he didn't blame her. He'd do the same thing if he could. But he couldn't run. He had a kid, a job, responsibilities that kept him tethered to this place. So he stayed and dealt with the hollow feeling in his chest that he told himself was relief, but felt a lot more like loss. The weeks without Iris were harder than Lucas wanted to admit. He hadn't realized how much he'd come to rely on her presence, the ease of their friendship, the way she made his life feel less isolated. Without her, the apartment felt emptier. Ethan asked about her constantly, and Lucas ran out of variations on "she's busy" that sounded believable. Work became his escape again, the physical exhaustion a welcome distraction from the mental exhaustion of overthinking everything. His coworkers noticed he was taking every available shift, staying late, volunteering for the worst assignments. His supervisor pulled him aside one night. "Reed, you trying to kill yourself or just avoiding something at home?" "Just need the money," Lucas said, which was partially true. "Yeah, well, pace yourself. Dead guys can't work overtime." Lucas promised to ease up, but he didn't. He needed the work, needed the distraction, needed something to fill the space Iris had occupied. 3 weeks after she left, she came back. Lucas heard her return late one night, the familiar sound of her door, the thud of luggage being dropped. He stood in his kitchen listening, his heart doing something complicated and painful, wanting to knock on her door and knowing he shouldn't. He didn't sleep that night either. The next morning, he ran into her in the hallway. She looked different, thinner, tired, but somehow more settled, like she'd worked through something and come out the other side changed. "Hi," she said quietly. "Hi. How was your trip?" "Awful and necessary." She managed a small smile. "I spent 3 weeks being reminded why I left home in the first place, which actually helped put things in perspective." "Yeah?" "Yeah. My parents are who they are. I can't change them, can't make them see me the way I need to be seen. I have to find that validation somewhere else. But not from you." The words should have brought relief, but instead they felt like an ending. "Iris, it's okay. I get it now. What you said about me being at the beginning of my life and you being in the middle of yours, you were right. I was trying to skip ahead to some imagined future where I was already grown and healed and ready for something real. But I'm not there yet. I need to actually do the work of becoming myself before I can be part of anyone else's life in that way." Lucas felt something break open in his chest. Pride mixed with sadness, mixed with the sharp awareness that she was pulling away, and it was exactly what needed to happen. "That's really mature of you," he said. "My therapist would be so proud." She shifted her bag on her shoulder. I wanted to tell you that I got accepted to the Amsterdam program. I'm leaving in August. That's amazing. Congratulations. Thank you. I think it's what I need. Complete reset, new city, chance to figure out who I am when I'm not just reacting to my family or clinging to the first person who showed me kindness. You're going to do great things, Iris. Maybe. I'm going to try, anyway. She paused, looking at him with those dark, serious eyes. Can we still be friends? Real friends this time, with actual boundaries that I respect. I'd like that. Good. Because I'm going to need help with my sublet while I'm gone, and you're the only person I trust not to let the place fall apart. They both laughed, and it felt like something loosening, tension releasing. Maybe they could do this. Maybe they could navigate the complicated terrain between caring about each other and wanting things that couldn't happen. The next few months were an exercise in careful choreography. Iris and Lucas rebuilt their friendship on more solid ground, with clearer boundaries and better awareness of the pitfalls. She came over sometimes, always when Ethan was home, and they talked about her preparations for Amsterdam, her classes, the friends she'd made. Lucas told her about work, about Ethan's progress in school, about the small victories and frustrations of single parenting. It was good. Different from before, more intentional, but good. Ethan was thrilled to have Miss Iris back, and Lucas watched them together with bittersweet awareness that she'd be gone soon, that his son was going to lose another person he'd gotten attached to. Will you write to me from Amsterdam? Ethan asked her one evening while they were working on another school project. Of course. I'll send you postcards and tell you about all the weird things I see. Will you come back? Iris looked at Lucas, and he saw the question in her eyes. What should I tell him? I'll come back to visit, she said carefully, but I might not live here anymore. Sometimes people move to new places and make new lives there. Like Mom did in Florida? Sort of like that, yeah. Ethan processed this with the resignation of a kid who'd already learned that people left. Okay, but you'll still send postcards? Every week, I promise. She kept her word on the small things, Lucas noticed. When she said she'd do something, she did it. It was one of the things he admired about her, the way she honored her commitments even when it would be easier not to. June arrived with the kind of heat that made the city feel like it was melting. Lucas's building had terrible air conditioning, and he spent most evenings with his windows open, listening to the sounds of Brooklyn in summer, sirens and music, and people arguing in languages he didn't understand. One particularly hot Saturday, Ethan was at a friend's house for a pool party, and Lucas was trying to fix the ancient fan in his living room when Iris knocked. I'm cleaning out my apartment, she said, getting ready to sublet. Want to help? It was the kind of excuse they both knew was thin. She didn't need help cleaning, but Lucas said yes anyway because the apartment was stifling and he had nothing better to do. Her place looked different, boxes stacked and half-packed, the sparse furniture pushed around to make room for sorting. It looked like a life being dismantled, and Lucas felt an unexpected pang of sadness seeing it. I can't believe how much stuff I've accumulated, Iris said, sorting through a box of books. I moved here with 2 suitcases and now I have all this. That's what happens when you stay somewhere long enough to actually live instead of just exist. I guess that's... She held up a sociology textbook. Think the person subletting will want my old coursework? Probably not. They worked in companionable silence, sorting and packing, and Lucas found himself memorizing details he hadn't paid attention to before. The way she organized her books by topic instead of author. The collection of coffee mugs from different cities she'd visited. The framed photo of her and her parents from what looked like high school graduation. Everyone smiling in that practiced way that suggested they'd been told to look happy rather than actually feeling it. That's the last time we all looked like a normal family, Iris said, noticing him looking at the photo. Before I left for college and stopped pretending we had anything real connecting us. Do you think you'll ever repair that relationship? I don't know. My therapist says I need to accept them as they are and stop hoping they'll become who I need them to be. But that's easier said than done. She wrapped the frame in newspaper and put it in a box. What about you and your ex? Do you think you'll ever get to a place where you can actually co-parent without hostility? Probably not. She's made it pretty clear she sees Ethan as an obligation she fulfilled by giving birth to him. Everything after that is my responsibility." He heard the bitterness in his voice and tried to dial it back. "Sorry. I try not to talk badly about her around Ethan, but sometimes it leaks out." "You're allowed to be angry. She abandoned you both." "She didn't abandon us. She just chose a different life." "That's a very generous interpretation." "I'm trying to be the bigger person, for Ethan's sake." Iris sat down on the floor, looking at him with that directness he'd come to expect from her. "Can I tell you something without you getting defensive? That's a concerning preamble, but sure. You're so busy being noble and self-sacrificing that you never let yourself acknowledge how much it hurts. You've been abandoned by your wife, isolated by your friends, and you're raising a kid alone on a warehouse salary. That's objectively terrible, and you're allowed to be angry about it." Lucas felt something hot and sharp in his throat. What good does being angry do? It doesn't change anything. It doesn't make my life easier or my kid happier. It just makes me bitter. Or it makes you human. You can be both, you know. A good father and someone who's pissed off about how unfair everything is. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. I don't have the luxury of falling apart. I'm not asking you to fall apart. I'm asking you to admit that you're hurting instead of pretending you're fine all the time. Lucas sat down next to her, suddenly exhausted by the effort of holding everything together. Of course I'm hurting. I'm lonely and tired and scared I'm screwing up my kid beyond repair. I lie awake at night worrying about money and whether Ethan's going to grow up thinking love is just people leaving. I feel like I'm failing at everything that matters even when I'm doing my best. Is that what you wanted to hear? Yes, because it's the truth, and you don't have to carry it alone. But I do. That's the whole point. There's no one else. Iris reached out and took his hand, and Lucas knew he should pull away, but he didn't. Her hand was small and warm, and the contact felt like the first honest thing that had happened to him in months. You have me, she said quietly. Not in the way I wanted before, but you still have me. As a friend who actually gives a damn about whether you're okay. You're leaving in 2 months. So we have 2 months. And then I'll be in Amsterdam, but I'll still care. Distance doesn't erase people. Lucas looked down at their joined hands, at the way she held on like she could anchor him to something solid. He knew this was dangerous, knew they were treading in territory they'd agreed to avoid, but he was so tired of being careful. I'm going to miss you, he said. I'm going to miss you too. They sat like that for a long moment, hands joined, not saying the other things they were both thinking. Then Iris pulled away and stood up, breaking the spell. Come on. Help me figure out what to do with these books. They finished packing, and Lucas went back to his apartment feeling unsettled. They'd stayed within the boundaries they'd set, barely, but he could feel the pull between them getting stronger. 2 months suddenly felt both too long and not nearly long enough. July came in hot and relentless. Lucas worked through the heat, coming home drenched in sweat and too tired to do anything but shower and collapse. Ethan spent long days at summer camp, coming home full of stories about swimming and crafts and the friends he was making. It was good to see him thriving, adjusting to their new life with the resilience of childhood. Iris's countdown to Amsterdam became a constant presence. She was busy with preparations, meeting with advisors, getting her paperwork in order, packing and repacking. Lucas helped when he could, watching her prepare for a future that would take her thousands of miles away. They didn't talk about what happened in her apartment that day, the moment of vulnerability they'd both shared. But it hung between them, a reminder of how easy it would be to cross lines they'd drawn for good reasons. One evening in late July, Iris invited them over for dinner. She'd made pasta from scratch, an ambitious project that had clearly taken all day, and she looked proud and exhausted when they arrived. This is really good, Miss Iris, Ethan said, twirling spaghetti on his fork with the concentration of someone performing surgery. Thank you. I wanted to cook you something special before I leave. When do you leave? 2 weeks. August 4th. Ethan's face fell. That's soon. I know, but I'll send you postcards, remember? And maybe you and your dad can come visit me someday. She said it casually, like it was a real possibility, but Lucas knew better. International travel required money and time he didn't have, and by the time those things changed, Iris would have moved on to a different life entirely. After dinner, Ethan settled on the couch with his book about space, and Iris and Lucas cleaned up the kitchen together. Thank you for this, Lucas said, drying dishes. You didn't have to go to all this trouble. I wanted to. You guys have become important to me. I wanted to do something nice before I go. We're going to miss having you next door. I'm going to miss being next door. She paused, her hands in the soapy water. Lucas, can I ask you something? Sure. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd met at a different time? If the circumstances were different? Lucas set down the dish he was drying. Sometimes, but I try not to. Why not? Because it doesn't matter. We met when we met, we are who we are, and wondering about alternative timelines doesn't change anything. But if I was older, or you were younger, or we'd met after I'd done more growing up, Iris, don't do this. I'm just asking a hypothetical question. No, you're not. You're asking if there's a universe where this could work, and the answer is I don't know, maybe. But we don't live in that universe. We live in this one where you're 20 and about to start an amazing adventure, and I'm a 30-year-old single dad trying to keep his life from falling apart. That's not all you are. It's all I have bandwidth for right now. Iris pulled her hands from the water and dried them slowly. I need to tell you something before I leave, and I need you to just listen without trying to fix it or rationalize it away. Lucas felt his stomach tighten. Okay. I think I fell in love with you. Not the desperate, lonely version from before, but the real thing. I know that complicates everything, and I know nothing can come of it, but I need you to know it's real. You weren't just convenient or a father figure or someone I projected onto. You're someone I genuinely care about in a way that goes beyond friendship. The words hung in the kitchen between them, and Lucas felt the floor shift under his feet. I don't know what to do with that information, he said quietly. You don't have to do anything with it. I'm leaving in 2 weeks. I just needed you to know that what I feel for you isn't something I need to get over or grow out of. It's something I'm choosing to honor by walking away, because I care about you enough to not complicate your life more than it already is. Lucas looked at her standing there, so young and so brave, offering him a kind of love he hadn't experienced in years, maybe ever. The temptation to reach for it was overwhelming, a physical ache in his chest. Iris, don't. Please don't say anything. I know what you're going to say and you're right. I'm leaving, you have Ethan, the timing is terrible, all of it. I know. I'm not asking you to feel the same way. I'm just asking you to let me be honest before I go. I do feel the same way. The words came out before he could stop them, and he saw her eyes widen. Not in a way I can act on, not in a way that changes anything, but I feel it too. And that's why you need to leave, and why I need to let you go. Because if you stay, I'm going to do something we'll both regret. Iris took a step toward him, and Lucas held up his hand. Don't. We've been so careful. We've done the right thing. Don't make it harder. What if I want it to be harder? What if I'm tired of doing the right thing? Then you're going to have to be tired while I stay strong for both of us. Because this, he gestured between them, can't happen. Not now. Not like this. He saw the tears in her eyes, saw her swallow against them. You're right. I know you're right. I just wish you weren't. Me too. They stood in the kitchen, two people who cared about each other trapped by circumstance and timing, and all the rational reasons they couldn't be together. Finally, Iris wiped her eyes and forced a smile. I should check on Ethan. Make sure he's not getting too lost in that space book. They went back to the living room, and the rest of the evening passed in careful normalcy, both of them pretending the conversation in the kitchen hadn't happened. When it was time to leave, Iris hugged Ethan and told him she'd see him before she left. At the door, she looked at Lucas. Thank you for being honest, even when it hurts. That's what friends do. Are we still friends? Always. He took Ethan home and got him ready for bed, going through the familiar routine while his mind replayed the conversation over and over. He'd said too much and not enough, admitted feelings he should have kept buried, and now he had to live with the weight of them for the next 2 weeks. The following days were torture. Lucas and Iris saw each other in passing, brief encounters in the hallway that were cordial and painful. They didn't talk about what had been said, didn't acknowledge the confession that hung between them. Instead, they made small talk about weather and subletting and travel logistics, performing normalcy while everything underneath stayed unresolved. Lucas threw himself into work again, picking up every available shift. He came home exhausted and went to bed early, avoiding the hours when he might hear Iris through the walls or be tempted to knock on her door. 3 days before she was set to leave, her parents came to visit. Lucas met them in the hallway by accident, a well-dressed couple in their 50s who looked exactly like Iris had described them. Polite, distant, performing the role of concerned parents without any of the actual concern. "You must be Lucas," her father said, extending a hand. "Iris has mentioned you. Thank you for keeping an eye on her." Lucas shook his hand, disturbed by the man's casual assumption that Iris needed keeping an eye on. "She doesn't need supervision. She's very capable." "Of course. We just appreciate knowing she had someone reliable nearby." Iris's mother smiled in that practiced way that didn't reach her eyes. "It's nice that she had a friend. She's always struggled with that." Lucas felt protective anger rising, but pushed it down. "She's actually very good at making friends. You'd be proud of her." They made polite noises and disappeared into Iris's apartment, and Lucas stood in the hallway, feeling furious on her behalf. This was what she'd been dealing with her whole life. Parents who saw her as a project rather than a person, who cataloged her struggles without actually helping her. That evening, Iris knocked on his door. She looked drained. "How's the parental visit going?" Lucas asked. "About as expected. My dad's critiquing my sublet arrangements, and my mom's passive-aggressively suggesting I should come home instead of going to Amsterdam. The usual." "I'm sorry." "It's fine. I'm used to it." She glanced back toward her apartment. "They want to take me to dinner tomorrow night. Some expensive place in Manhattan to celebrate my departure. They asked if you and Ethan wanted to come." Lucas tried to hide his surprise. "They asked about us?" "I told them you were important to me. They're trying to be polite." She smiled sadly. "Will you come? It would make the evening slightly less unbearable." Every instinct told him to say no, to maintain distance, to not blur lines further. But he looked at Iris standing there, asking for help dealing with her family, and he couldn't refuse. "Yeah, we'll come. Thank you." The restaurant was the kind of place that made Lucas immediately uncomfortable. White tablecloths and hushed conversations and prices that made him quietly panic. Ethan was on his best behavior, intimidated by the formal atmosphere, and Lucas felt acutely aware of how out of place they were. Iris's parents made polite conversation about Lucas's work, Ethan's school, the challenges of single parenting. They were expert at seeming interested while conveying subtle disapproval through careful word choice and meaningful pauses. "It must be difficult," Iris's mother said, "raising a child alone. Such a responsibility." "It is," Lucas agreed, "but Ethan makes it worth it." Still, one wonders about the long-term implications. Children need two parents, stable homes. Iris tensed next to him, and Lucas saw her father shoot his wife a look that suggested she'd crossed a line. "Actually," Iris said firmly, "Ethan seems remarkably well-adjusted for a kid who's been through his parents' divorce. That's because Lucas prioritizes his emotional well-being over maintaining appearances. You could learn something from that." The table went silent. Iris's mother's expression froze in polite shock. "Iris," her father said quietly, "that's inappropriate." "Is it? Because I think it's inappropriate to sit here judging Lucas for actually being present for his kid when you've spent my entire life being physically present but emotionally absent. At least Lucas's kid knows his father loves him." Lucas wanted to sink through the floor. Ethan was looking between the adults with wide eyes, sensing conflict he couldn't fully understand. "Perhaps we should discuss this later," Iris's father said, his voice tight. "No, we're going to discuss it now. Because in 3 days I'm leaving for Amsterdam, and I need you to know that the reason I'm going is because being around you makes me feel invisible. Like I'm just a checkbox on your list of parental obligations. And I'm done pretending that's okay." Her mother set down her fork carefully. "We have always supported you. Financially, sure. But that's not the same as actually caring about who I am or what I want. You've never asked me what I'm afraid of, or what makes me happy, or what I dream about. You just keep pushing me towards some version of success that has nothing to do with me." "That's not fair," her father said. "Isn't it?" When was the last time you asked me how I was doing and actually listened to the answer? Lucas reached under the table and squeezed Iris's hand, trying to ground her, trying to let her know she wasn't alone, even though she was absolutely right to call them out. The rest of the dinner was painful and strained. They made it through the meal with forced civility, and when it was over, Lucas got Ethan out of there as quickly as possible. Why was Miss Iris yelling at her parents? Ethan asked in the taxi home. Sometimes people need to say hard truths even when it's uncomfortable. Miss Iris was being brave. Are her parents bad? No, they're just imperfect, like all parents. When they got home, Iris was already back in her apartment. Lucas could hear her parents' raised voices through the wall, the sound of an argument that should have happened years ago. Hours later, after Ethan was asleep, she knocked on his door. Her eyes were red, but her expression was calm. I'm sorry for dragging you into that disaster. Don't apologize. You were right to say what you said. They left. They're flying home tomorrow instead of staying to see me off. My mom said I'd embarrass them, and my dad just looked disappointed, as usual. I'm sorry. Don't be. It needed to happen. She leaned against his doorframe. You know what the crazy thing is? I feel lighter. Like I finally stopped performing for an audience that was never going to appreciate the show anyway. That's growth. Or stupidity. Time will tell. She smiled, but it was fragile. Can I come in? Just for a minute? I don't want to be alone right now. Lucas knew he should say no. It was late. Ethan was asleep. They were 2 days away from her leaving, and every boundary they'd set was paper thin. But he stepped aside and let her in anyway. She sat on the couch, curling into herself like she was trying to take up less space. Lucas sat in the chair across from her, maintaining distance, even though every part of him wanted to close it. Do you want tea or something? He asked, needing something to do with his hands. No, I just need to sit somewhere that doesn't feel like my whole life is imploding. Your life isn't imploding. You just had a hard conversation that's been coming for years. Maybe. She looked at him with exhausted eyes. You know what the worst part is? Part of me wanted them to fight back, to actually engage instead of just looking hurt and leaving. At least that would have meant they cared enough to argue. They do care. They just don't know how to show it in a way that matters to you. That's generous. I'm trying to be the adult here. Iris laughed, but it sounded hollow. You're always the adult, always the responsible one. Don't you ever get tired of it? Every single day. They sat in silence for a moment, and Lucas became acutely aware of the late hour, the quiet apartment, the way Iris was looking at him like he was the only solid thing in a world that kept shifting. Lucas, she said quietly, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Okay. If I wasn't leaving, if there was no Amsterdam, no age gap, no complications, would you want this? Us? The question hung in the air like smoke, and Lucas felt his heart hammering against his ribs. This was the conversation they'd been avoiding, the one they both knew could destroy the careful boundaries they'd built. That's not a fair question, he said. I know, but I need to hear the answer anyway. I need to know if I'm crazy for feeling this way or if there's something real here that we're both just too scared to reach for. Lucas looked at her, really looked at her, and saw someone who'd been brave enough to confront her parents, to risk everything for honesty. She deserved the same from him. If the circumstances were different, he said slowly, if you were older or I was in a different place in my life, if Ethan wasn't a factor and you weren't about to start this amazing new chapter, then yes, I would want this. You make me feel less alone in a way I didn't think was possible anymore. You see me as more than just a tired single dad. You make me remember that I'm allowed to want things for myself. He watched tears slide down her cheeks and continued, knowing he had to say all of it. But the circumstances aren't different. You are leaving. There is an age gap. I do have a son who needs stability, not his father making messy choices because he's lonely. And you deserve to go to Amsterdam and figure out who you are without someone like me anchoring you to a life you haven't even started living yet. What if I don't care about any of that? Then I have to care enough for both of us. That's what adults do. We make the hard choices that protect people we care about, even when it hurts. Iris stood up abruptly, crossing to where he sat. Before Lucas could process what was happening, she was kneeling in front of him, her hands on his knees. "I'm leaving in 2 days," she said, her voice shaking. 2 days and then I'll be gone and this moment won't exist anymore. Can't we just have this? Just once? Just to know what it would have been like." Lucas felt something break inside him. The temptation was overwhelming. She was right there, offering him exactly what he'd been trying not to want. It would be so easy to say yes, to take what she was offering and deal with the consequences later. But he thought about Ethan sleeping in the next room, about the trust Iris had placed in him from the beginning, about what it would mean to cross this line when she was this vulnerable, this raw from confronting her parents. "No," he said, and the word felt like swallowing glass. "We can't." "Why not?" "Because you're upset and emotional and you're not thinking clearly. Because tomorrow you'd regret it and I'd hate myself for taking advantage of you when you were hurting. Because I care about you too much to let you make a choice you can't take back. I'm 20 years old. I'm allowed to make my own choices. You are. But I'm 30, and I know what it's like to make decisions from a place of pain and desperation. I know how those choices follow you. I won't be that for you." Iris let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "You're impossibly stubborn." "I'm trying to protect you." "From what? From feeling something real? From having one honest moment before I leave?" "From me. From making a mistake that complicates everything when you should be moving forward, not looking back." She stayed kneeling there, her hands still on his knees, and Lucas had to physically restrain himself from reaching for her. The want was a living thing in his chest, clawing at him, but he stayed perfectly still. "I love you," Iris whispered. "I know you don't want to hear it. I know it doesn't change anything, but I need to say it one more time. I love you, and I wish things were different." "I love you too," Lucas said, because she deserved that truth at least. But loving someone doesn't always mean being with them. Sometimes it means letting them go. Iris pulled back, standing up and wiping her eyes. "You're going to make some woman very happy someday. Someone age-appropriate who has her life together and doesn't come with all my baggage. I'm not looking for someone." "You should. You deserve to be happy, Lucas. You deserve someone who can actually be there for you instead of just creating more complications. So do you. You're going to meet someone in Amsterdam who makes you forget all about the sad divorced guy next door." "I doubt that." She moved toward the door and Lucas stood up, following her. At the threshold, she turned back. "Thank you for saying no. I know it was hard. Hardest thing I've done in a long time. That's how I know it was the right thing." She touched his face briefly, her hand warm against his cheek. "Goodbye, Lucas. You're not leaving for 2 more days." "I know, but I think I need to say goodbye now, cleanly, before I do something stupid like try to convince you again." Lucas understood. This was her drawing the line, protecting them both from the temptation to make choices they'd regret. "Goodbye, Iris. Go do amazing things." She left, and Lucas closed the door behind her and stood in his empty living room, feeling like something vital had been carved out of his chest. He'd done the right thing. He knew he'd done the right thing, but knowing it didn't make it hurt less. The next 2 days were agony. Lucas heard Iris moving around next door, finishing her packing, saying goodbye to the building superintendent, coordinating with the person who would be subletting her apartment. They didn't speak. They didn't run into each other in the hallway. It was like she'd become a ghost, present but unreachable. Ethan noticed the change. "Are you and Miss Iris fighting?" "Nobody. We're just giving each other space." "Is she still leaving?" "Yeah, tomorrow." "I'm going to miss her." "Me too." The morning of her departure, Lucas got up early to make Ethan breakfast before school. As he was scrambling eggs, he heard Iris's door open, heard the sound of luggage wheels in the hallway. He fought the urge to open his own door, to see her one last time, to say something that would make this easier. He didn't. He stayed in his kitchen, making breakfast for his son, being the responsible adult he'd committed to being. But Ethan had no such restraint. He heard the sounds too and ran to the door, yanking it open before Lucas could stop him. "Miss Iris, are you leaving now?" Lucas came to the doorway and saw her standing there with 2 large suitcases, dressed for travel, looking both excited and heartbroken. "I am," she said, crouching down to Ethan's level. "But I wanted to leave you something before I went." She pulled an envelope from her bag and handed it to him. Don't open it until I'm gone, okay? It's a special letter just for you. Will you really send postcards? Every single week, I promise. Ethan hugged her, and Lucas saw Iris close her eyes, holding his son tight. When she let go, she stood up and looked at Lucas. Take care of yourself, she said. You too. Have an amazing adventure. I'll try. She picked up her suitcases, and Lucas wanted to offer to help her carry them down, but knew that would just prolong the goodbye. Lucas? Yeah? Thank you for everything, for being exactly what I needed, even when it wasn't what I wanted. Same to you. She smiled, that sad, beautiful smile he'd come to know so well. And then she was gone. He heard her footsteps on the stairs, heard the building door close behind her, and then just silence. Lucas stood in his doorway, staring at the empty hallway, while Ethan opened the envelope Iris had given him. Inside was a postcard from Brooklyn with a message written in her careful handwriting. What does it say? Lucas asked. Dear Ethan, his son read slowly. Thank you for being my friend and for sharing your dad with me. You're one of the bravest, smartest kids I know. Keep learning about space and being kind to people. The world needs more people like you. Love, Miss Iris. There was a P.S. at the bottom that Ethan read with confusion. Tell your dad he did the right thing. What does that mean? Just something between friends, Lucas said, his throat tight. Come on, buddy. You need to finish breakfast before school. They went back inside, and Lucas closed the door on the empty hallway and the chapter of his life that Iris had occupied. The apartment felt hollow without Iris next door. Lucas had gotten so used to the sounds of her presence, her music, her footsteps, the occasional burst of laughter when she was on the phone with friends. Now there was just a stranger subletting her place, someone who kept odd hours and played different music and had no connection to Lucas or Ethan. The postcards started arriving a week after she left, exactly as she'd promised. Pictures of canals and bicycles and old buildings with messages for Ethan about what she was seeing and learning. Ethan collected them carefully, pinning them to a board in his room, and sometimes Lucas would find him staring at them with an expression that was too old for his 7 years. Do you think Miss Iris is happy? Ethan asked one night at bedtime. I think she's exactly where she needs to be. But is she happy? Lucas thought about it. I think she's finding out who she is, and sometimes that's more important than being happy. That doesn't make sense. It will when you're older. Summer faded into fall, and Lucas settled into a new routine that didn't include Iris. Work, parenting, the endless cycle of responsibility. He dated someone briefly, a woman he met at Ethan's school who was nice and age-appropriate and completely uninteresting to him. They went on 4 dates before mutually agreeing they had no chemistry. His coworker asked him what he was looking for, and Lucas realized he didn't have an answer. He'd spent so long just trying to survive that he'd forgotten to think about what he actually wanted. The postcards kept coming, weekly updates from Amsterdam. Iris was thriving, taking interesting classes, making friends from around the world, traveling on weekends to other European cities. She sounded happy in the messages, or at least busy enough that happiness seemed possible. She never asked about Lucas directly, and he was grateful for that. It made it easier to move on, to treat their time together as a closed chapter rather than an ongoing story. Winter came again, a full year since he'd moved into the building. Ethan turned 8. Lucas got a small promotion at work that came with slightly better hours and a minimal pay increase. His ex-wife got engaged to her boyfriend in Florida and stopped pretending she cared about regular visitation. Life continued, neither good nor bad, just ongoing. One evening in late February, Lucas was helping Ethan with homework when his phone buzzed with an email notification. He glanced at it absently and then stopped, his heart doing something complicated. It was from Iris. Subject line, 2 years later. He waited until Ethan was asleep to read it. Dear Lucas, I'm writing this from a cafe in Amsterdam where I've been sitting for an hour trying to figure out what to say. It's been almost 2 years since I left, and I wanted to reach out because something happened today that made me think of you. I met someone. His name is Eric. He's Dutch, and he's the first person since you who makes me feel seen. We've been dating for 3 months, and it's good. Really good. But today he told me he loved me, and instead of saying it back, I froze. Because I realized I've been comparing everyone I meet to you, measuring them against a standard they can't possibly meet, because you weren't just someone I cared about. You were the person who taught me what it means to care about someone else's well-being more than my own wants. I need to let you go. Really let you go, not just physically, but emotionally. I need to stop holding on to what we almost had and let myself fully commit to what I could have with someone who's actually available and appropriate. But before I do that, I needed to tell you that you changed my life. You showed me that kindness and restraint aren't weakness, they're strength. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say no. That protecting someone from their own messy choices is a gift, even when it hurts. I'm going to stay in Amsterdam after my program ends. I got accepted to a PhD program here studying social isolation and community building. Turns out our conversations about loneliness actually gave me a research focus. I hope you're doing well. I hope you've found someone who deserves you. I hope Ethan is thriving and that you're letting yourself want things again instead of just surviving. Thank you for being exactly who you were when I needed it most. I'm saying goodbye now, really and truly, so I can move forward. With love and gratitude, Iris Lucas read the email 3 times, feeling a complex mixture of emotions he couldn't quite name. Pride that she was thriving, sadness that this was really the end, relief that she was choosing to move forward, and underneath it all, a quiet grief for the connection they'd shared and the possibilities they'd sacrificed. He typed a response carefully. Iris, thank you for writing. I'm so happy you're building a life there that makes you excited about the future. Eric is a lucky guy. You don't need my permission to move on, but if you did, you'd have it. What we had was real and important, but you're right that it belonged to a specific moment in both our lives. Holding on to it keeps both of us stuck. For what it's worth, you taught me things too. You reminded me that I'm allowed to be more than just a father, that my own emotional needs matter, that vulnerability isn't the same as weakness. You made me remember how to be a person instead of just a function. I'm doing okay. Work is better, Ethan is thriving, and I'm finally starting to think about what I want instead of just what I have to do. I even went on a few dates, though nothing stuck. I'm proud of you for choosing the harder path of genuine growth over comfortable longing. That takes courage. Be well. Be happy. And don't feel guilty about letting go. That's what we were always heading toward. Lucas. He sent it before he could second-guess himself, and then he sat in the quiet apartment feeling like something had shifted, a weight he'd been carrying without realizing it had lifted. Iris had been right. They needed to let each other go. The weeks that followed felt different, lighter somehow. Lucas started actually engaging with his life instead of just moving through it. He accepted invitations from the other parents at Ethan's school. He took a woodworking class at the community center just because it sounded interesting. He let himself imagine a future that included more than just work and parenting. Spring came, and with it a sense of possibility he hadn't felt in years. One Saturday afternoon, he was at the playground with Ethan when he struck up a conversation with another parent, a woman named Sarah, whose daughter was in Ethan's class. They talked about the usual things, school, kids, the challenges of single parenting. But there was ease to it, a natural compatibility that Lucas hadn't felt since Iris. Would you want to grab coffee sometime? Sarah asked. Like, without the kids? Actual adult conversation. Lucas thought about it. No baggage, no complications, just 2 people seeing if they enjoyed each other's company. Yeah, he said. I'd like that. They exchanged numbers, and Lucas felt something open in his chest. Not the overwhelming intensity he'd felt with Iris, but something steadier. The possibility of building something real instead of just surviving the wreckage of what had fallen apart. That night, after Ethan was asleep, Lucas went through his apartment and took down the last remnants of his old life. Photos from his marriage that he'd never bothered to remove, boxes from the move that he'd never unpacked, the postcard from Iris that he'd kept pinned to his refrigerator. He wasn't erasing the past. He was just making room for a future that didn't revolve around what he'd lost. As he was cleaning, he found the note Iris had slipped under his door all those months ago, the one where she'd apologized for putting him in an impossible position. He read it one last time and then put it in a drawer, a reminder of who he'd been and the choice he'd made. He'd done the right thing. Iris had confirmed it. And now they were both moving forward, carrying the lessons they'd learned from each other, but not weighed down by regret. Summer arrived with its usual heat and chaos. Ethan finished second grade with good grades and a friend group that actually seemed to like him. Lucas's promotion came with new responsibilities that he found he actually enjoyed. Sarah turned into a genuine relationship, something steady and comfortable that didn't demand more than either of them could give. The postcards from Iris stopped coming. Lucas assumed she'd told Ethan in a letter, giving him closure in her gentle way. His son had been sad for a few days, but then he'd moved on the way kids do, finding new interests and new people to care about. Lucas ran into Iris's former landlord one day in the building lobby. "That girl who used to live in 3B, the landlord said. She finally gave up the sublet, said she wasn't coming back to New York." "Good for her," Lucas said, and meant it. He went upstairs to his apartment, the same one he'd moved into 2 years ago, and looked around at the life he'd built. It wasn't the life he'd planned, wasn't the future he'd imagined when he'd gotten married and had a kid, but it was his, and it was good enough. That night, he took Sarah and Ethan to a movie. Sitting in the dark theater between his son and a woman who made him laugh, Lucas felt something he hadn't felt in years: contentment. Not happiness exactly, but the quiet satisfaction of knowing he'd made the right choices, even the hard ones. Especially the hard ones. After the movie, after he'd dropped Sarah at her place with a kiss that promised more, after he'd gotten Ethan ready for bed, Lucas sat alone in his living room with a glass of whiskey and thought about the past 2 years. He thought about loneliness and connection, about the desperate way people reached for each other when they felt invisible, about the courage it took to say no to something you wanted because you knew it was wrong. He thought about Iris in Amsterdam, building a life with someone who could give her what she needed without the complications. He hoped she was happy. He hoped she'd found the sense of self she'd been searching for. And he thought about himself, about the man he'd become through the process of doing the hard thing. Stronger, maybe. More certain of his own values. Less afraid of being alone because he'd learned the difference between solitude and isolation. His phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Had fun tonight. Same time next week?" Lucas smiled and typed back, "Sounds perfect." He finished his whiskey and went to bed, and for the first time in years, he slept through the night without waking up feeling like something vital was missing. In Amsterdam, Iris was probably sleeping too, curled up next to Eric in whatever apartment they shared, dreaming of the research she was conducting and the future she was building. They'd both survived. They'd both made the hard choices that led to growth instead of comfort. And maybe that was the best possible ending. Not together, but both whole. Not happy in the desperate, clinging way lonely people sought happiness, but content in the quieter knowledge that they'd done right by each other and themselves. The next morning, Lucas woke up to Ethan jumping on his bed, demanding pancakes and talking excitedly about the swimming lessons he was starting that week. Lucas made breakfast, helped his son get ready, and went through the morning routine that had become so familiar it felt like breathing. Life continued. Not perfect, not easy, but real and earned and entirely his own. And that, Lucas thought as he walked Ethan to the community pool, was enough. 3 years passed like water through fingers. Lucas celebrated his 34th birthday at a small restaurant in Park Slope with Sarah, Ethan, and a handful of friends he'd managed to accumulate through work and Ethan's school activities. It wasn't a big celebration, but it was genuine, filled with the kind of easy laughter that came from people who actually knew each other rather than just performed proximity. Sarah had moved in 6 months earlier, a decision they'd made carefully after a year of dating. She was good for Lucas in ways he hadn't expected, patient with his baggage, wonderful with Ethan, and realistic about what relationships required. They didn't have the burning intensity of first love, but they had something steadier: partnership, mutual respect, the kind of foundation you could actually build a life on. Ethan was 10 now, growing faster than Lucas could process. He'd shot up 3 inches in the past year, all gangly limbs and changing voice. He played soccer, had a best friend named Marcus, and had recently announced he wanted to be an aerospace engineer. The stuffed elephant from his early childhood sat on a shelf in his room, retired but not forgotten. Lucas had been promoted again at work, moving into a supervisor role that came with better pay and actual benefits. He'd started taking night classes in business management, thinking about a future that involved more than just loading trucks. Sarah encouraged it, helped him study, made sure he didn't give up when the workload felt overwhelming. Life was good, not perfect. There were still hard days, still moments when Lucas felt like he was barely keeping his head above water. But good, solid, real. And then one October afternoon, everything shifted. Lucas was at his desk doing paperwork when his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Is this Lucas Reed?" The voice was professional, female, unfamiliar. "Yeah, who's this?" "My name is Dr. Catherine Walsh. I'm calling from New York Presbyterian Hospital. We have a patient here who listed you as an emergency contact, Iris Bennett." Lucas felt the floor drop out from under him. "Is she okay? What happened?" "She was in a car accident. She's stable now, but she's asked to see you. Are you able to come to the hospital?" Yes, I'll be there as soon as I can. Which hospital?" Dr. Walsh gave him the address and room number, and Lucas was moving before he'd fully processed what he'd heard. Iris was back in New York. Iris had been in an accident. Iris had listed him as her emergency contact. He called Sarah on the way, explaining in fragmented sentences what had happened. "Go," she said immediately. "I'll pick up Ethan from school. Just go make sure she's okay." "Are you sure?" "Lucas, she clearly needs you. We'll be fine. Call me when you know more." He loved her for that, for understanding without making it complicated. The hospital was a maze of sterile hallways and antiseptic smells. Lucas found Iris's room on the 4th floor, his heart hammering as he approached. Through the small window in the door, he could see her lying in the bed, her left arm in a cast, bruises darkening one side of her face. He knocked softly and pushed the door open. Iris turned her head and her eyes widened. "You came." "Of course I came. What happened?" "Taxi ran a red light, T-boned the car I was in." She gestured at her cast. "Broken arm, some bruised ribs, mild concussion. I got lucky, apparently. The driver of my car is in surgery." Lucas pulled a chair next to her bed, taking in the evidence of trauma written across her body. "How long have you been back in New York?" 2 weeks. I was planning to call you, actually. I needed to figure out what to say first." "Why are you here? I thought you were staying in Amsterdam." Iris looked away, and Lucas saw something painful move across her face. Things didn't work out with Eric, or with the PhD program, or with Amsterdam in general, actually. I had this whole plan for my life there, and it fell apart spectacularly about 6 months ago. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It was my own fault. I spent 3 years trying to build a life that looked good on paper without asking myself if it was actually making me happy." She shifted in the bed, wincing. "Eric was great. The research was interesting. I had friends and a nice apartment and all the things I thought I wanted, but I felt like I was performing instead of living, like I was still trying to be someone else's version of who I should be." "So you came back?" "So I came back. To figure out who I actually am instead of who I think I should be." She finally looked at him. "You look good, Lucas. Really good. Different. 3 years will do that. You seem settled. Less like you're carrying the world on your shoulders." "I've had help. I'm seeing someone, Sarah. She's actually amazing." Something flickered in Iris's eyes, there and gone. "I'm glad. You deserve that. What about you? Are you seeing anyone?" "No. I need to be alone for a while. Actually alone, not just geographically isolated while still emotionally dependent on someone." She smiled, but it looked tired. "My therapist says I have a pattern of outsourcing my sense of self to other people. Apparently I need to work on that." "You're still in therapy?" "Twice a week now. Turns out running away to Europe doesn't actually solve your problems. Who knew?" Lucas laughed despite himself. Shocking. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and Lucas felt the years collapse. She looked older, more worn down by life, but there was something familiar in her eyes. The same searching quality, the same desperate need to understand and be understood. "Why did you list me as your emergency contact?" he asked quietly. Iris picked at the edge of her cast. "Because you're the only person I trust to show up without making it about them." My parents would just tell me this proved I should have stayed in Connecticut. Eric would feel obligated but resentful. My friends here are all people I knew before Amsterdam, and we've drifted apart. But you, I knew you'd come because you actually care, not because you feel like you should. You were right about that. I usually am about you. She met his eyes. I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me say it all before you respond. Lucas felt his stomach tighten. Okay. When I left 3 years ago, I thought distance would make what I felt for you go away. I thought if I just built a whole new life with new people and new experiences, I'd look back on us as this formative but ultimately insignificant chapter. First crush on an older guy who was kind to me. Very common, very predictable. Iris, let me finish. Please. She took a shaky breath. But it didn't go away. I dated Eric for 2 years, and the whole time I was comparing him to you. I'd do my research on loneliness and social isolation, and I'd think about our conversations. I'd have moments of genuine happiness, and my first instinct was always to tell you about them. You became this impossible standard I couldn't get past. That's not healthy. I know. That's why I'm in therapy twice a week. She laughed, but it sounded broken. About 6 months ago, I had this moment of clarity. I was at a party with Eric and his friends, all these accomplished academics talking about their research and their publications, and I realized I was bored out of my mind. Not because they weren't smart or interesting, but because none of them were real. Everyone was performing their best self, and I was so tired of performing. What did you do? I broke up with Eric. I withdrew from my PhD program. I came back to New York with no plan and no safety net because I needed to stop running from the uncomfortable truth that I have no idea who I am or what I want. And the accident? Just bad timing. I'd been back for 2 weeks, staying in a sublet in Queens, trying to figure out my next steps. I was coming back from a job interview when it happened. She looked at him with wet eyes. The first thing I thought when the car hit us was, I hope Lucas knows I didn't waste what he taught me. Isn't that pathetic? I'm lying there bleeding, and my first concern is whether you'd be proud of me. Lucas felt something crack open in his chest. I am proud of you. You took a chance on something that scared you. It didn't work out the way you planned, but you tried. That's not nothing. I needed to hear that. Iris wiped her eyes with her good hand. I'm not telling you this because I want something from you. I know you're with someone. I know we can't go back to that moment 3 years ago and make different choices. I'm telling you because I'm trying to be honest instead of hiding from uncomfortable truths. I appreciate that. Do you ever think about it? What would have happened if you'd said yes that night? Lucas thought about how to answer that truthfully. Sometimes. Usually late at night when I can't sleep and my brain decides to torture me with all the roads I didn't take. But then I think about Ethan and Sarah and the life I've actually built, and I know we made the right choice. Even if it hurt? Especially because it hurt. Easy choices don't teach you anything. Iris smiled, and it looked genuine this time. You're still impossibly wise for a guy who loads trucks for a living. I'm a supervisor now, thank you very much. I load trucks and tell other people how to load them. She laughed, and Lucas felt the tension ease slightly. They could do this. They could be honest about what had been while still respecting what was. How long are you in the hospital? He asked. They want to keep me overnight for observation because of the concussion. I should be released tomorrow afternoon. Do you have someone to pick you up? I was going to take an Uber. Don't be ridiculous. I'll pick you up. What time? Lucas, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. Friends help friends, remember? Are we still friends? After everything? I'd like to be, if you can handle boundaries better than last time. I'm working on it. My therapist is very optimistic about my progress. Lucas stayed for another hour, talking about safe topics. His relationship with Sarah, Ethan's latest obsession with building model rockets, Iris's job prospects now that she was back in New York. It felt good, familiar, but different, like they'd both grown enough to actually be the friends they'd claimed to be 3 years ago. When visiting hours ended, Lucas stood to leave. Thank you for coming, Iris said. I know it was probably weird, hearing from me out of nowhere. It was, but I'm glad you called. I'm glad you're okay. Me too. He left the hospital and called Sarah from the parking lot, explaining everything. She listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she asked the question he'd been dreading. How do you feel about seeing her again? Complicated. She's still important to me, but not in the same way. It's like seeing someone who used to be central to your story show up in a chapter where they don't quite fit anymore. Do you still have feelings for her? Lucas thought about it carefully. I care about her. I want her to be okay, but I don't want to be with her. Not anymore. What I have with you is real and solid, and I don't want to risk that. I believe you, but Lucas? Yeah? Be careful. Not because I don't trust you, but because loneliness makes people do stupid things. I should know. I was desperately lonely when we met. Don't let her pull you back into that place. I won't, I promise. He meant it, but driving home through the city lights, Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that Iris's return was going to complicate things in ways he hadn't anticipated. The next day, Lucas picked Iris up from the hospital as promised. She looked better in daylight, less fragile, though the bruises on her face had deepened to spectacular shades of purple and yellow. She'd changed into jeans and a sweater, her casted arm in a sling. Thank you for this, she said, settling carefully into the passenger seat. I know it's above and beyond friend duties. Where am I taking you? My sublet in Queens. It's not far. They drove in silence for a few minutes before Iris spoke again. Tell me about Sarah. What's she like? Lucas glanced at her, trying to gauge whether this was genuine curiosity or something else. She's kind, practical. A teacher at Ethan's school, actually. That's how we met. Does Ethan like her? Loves her. She's patient with his obsessive explaining about space and rockets. She actually listens instead of just nodding along. That's important. Iris looked out the window. I'm happy for you, Lucas. Really. You deserve someone who can actually be present instead of just creating complications. You weren't a complication. You were going through something hard and you needed support. I was a 20-year-old mess who had a crush on her neighbor. Let's not romanticize it. It was more than that, and you know it. Iris turned to look at him. Was it? Or was it just two lonely people clinging to each other because we didn't have anyone else? Does it matter? It was real to us at the time. That counts for something. Maybe. She went quiet again, and Lucas focused on driving, navigating the afternoon traffic. When they reached her building in Queens, Lucas helped her upstairs with her bag. The apartment was small and impersonal, clearly a temporary landing spot rather than a home. This is depressing, Lucas said before he could stop himself. Iris laughed. It's terrible, right? But it's cheap and month to month while I figure out my life. Again, for the third time. What are you going to do? I don't know. I have a few job interviews lined up. Research assistant positions, mostly. Nothing glamorous, but it pays. And I'm looking at apartments in Brooklyn, somewhere with actual character instead of this beige nightmare. Brooklyn's gotten expensive. Everything's gotten expensive. That's what happens when you spend 3 years in Europe. You come back and nothing's affordable anymore. She set her bag down carefully. Do you want coffee? I think I have instant. I should get going. Sarah's expecting me for dinner. Something flickered across Iris's face. Of course. Thank you again for the ride. Lucas hesitated at the door. Iris, can I ask you something? Sure. Why did you really come back? You had a whole life in Amsterdam. Why give that up? She was quiet for a long moment. Because I realized I was still running from the same things I was running from when I left. My parents' expectations, my own loneliness, the fear that I'm not enough. And Amsterdam wasn't solving any of it. It was just putting an ocean between me and the problems. So what's different now? Nothing, probably. But at least I'm facing it instead of hiding. She smiled sadly. I know that's not a great answer. I don't have some grand revelation or clear path forward. I'm just trying to be honest about being lost instead of pretending I know where I'm going. That's actually pretty brave. Or stupid, time will tell. Lucas left feeling unsettled. He'd meant what he told Sarah. He didn't want to be with Iris, didn't want to risk what he'd built. But seeing her again had stirred something he thought he'd put to rest. Not longing, exactly, but awareness. The recognition that she still mattered to him in ways that were complicated. Over the next few weeks, Iris became part of Lucas's life again, in careful, measured ways. She got a job as a research assistant at NYU, working with a professor who studied urban displacement. She found an apartment in Williamsburg, small, but with good light and actual character. She started rebuilding her life in New York with the kind of intentionality she'd lacked before. And she maintained appropriate boundaries with Lucas. She'd text occasionally to update him on job developments or apartment hunting, but she never pushed for more. When they met for coffee once a week, at Sarah's suggestion, surprisingly, they kept things light. No heavy conversations about feelings or regrets, just two people catching up on their separate lives. Sarah handled Iris's reappearance with grace that Lucas didn't deserve. "I'm not worried about her," she told him one evening after he'd gotten back from coffee with Iris. "I'm worried about you carrying guilt you don't need to carry." "What do you mean?" "You feel responsible for her happiness, for whether she's okay, for protecting her from herself. But she's not your responsibility, Lucas. She's a grown woman who needs to figure out her own life." "I know that." "Do you? Because you look stressed every time you come back from seeing her, like you're trying to solve a problem that isn't yours to solve." Lucas sat down heavily on the couch. "She doesn't have anyone else. Her parents are useless, she lost touch with most of her friends, and she's starting over from scratch. I can't just abandon her." "I'm not asking you to abandon her. I'm asking you to recognize the difference between being supportive and being enmeshed. She needs to build her own support system, not rely on you to be everything." "You sound like her therapist." "Her therapist is probably right." Sarah sat next to him. "I love that you care about people. It's one of the things I love about you. But you can care about someone without making their well-being your responsibility." Lucas knew she was right. He'd been falling back into old patterns, trying to fix Iris's loneliness because he remembered how his own had felt. But Iris wasn't his to fix. "I'll talk to her," he said. "Set some clearer boundaries." "Good. Because I'm not threatened by your history with her, but I am concerned about you taking on emotional labor you don't need to carry." The conversation with Iris happened a few days later at their usual coffee shop. Lucas had rehearsed what he wanted to say, but Iris beat him to it. "I'm going to stop our weekly coffee dates," she said, stirring sugar into her cup without looking at him. "What? Why?" "Because Sarah's right. I'm using you as an emotional crutch instead of building my own life. My therapist pointed it out too, actually. I have this pattern of finding one person and making them responsible for my emotional well-being instead of developing a broader support network. I don't mind helping. I know you don't. That's the problem. You'll keep showing up because you're a good person, and I'll keep leaning on you because it's easier than doing the hard work of making real friends and building genuine connections." She finally looked at him. "I need to actually grow up this time. No safety nets, no backup plans, no Lucas-shaped emotional support system. We can still be friends. Eventually, maybe, but right now I need distance. Real distance, not just physical. I need to prove to myself that I can exist without you." Lucas felt something twist in his chest. "This feels like goodbye." "It is goodbye, at least for now. Maybe we'll reconnect someday when we're both in better places. But right now, staying connected is keeping both of us stuck." She was right. Lucas knew she was right, but it still hurt. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly, "for recognizing what you need and asking for it. I learned from the best." Iris smiled, and it looked almost peaceful. "Thank you, Lucas. For everything. For saying no when I needed you to, for showing up when I called from the hospital, for treating me like someone worth saving even when I didn't believe it myself. You saved yourself. I just reminded you that you could. That's generous. But I'll take it." She stood up, and Lucas stood too. "This is it then. Real goodbye this time. Real goodbye." Iris hugged him with her good arm, and Lucas held her carefully, mindful of her healing ribs. She smelled different than he remembered, like she'd become someone new in the years between. "Be happy," she whispered. "You deserve it. You too." She left, and Lucas sat alone with his coffee, feeling the finality of it settle over him. This was really the end. No more Iris in his life, no more complicated feelings to navigate, no more guilt about what they'd almost been. It should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like loss. But loss was familiar. Lucas had learned how to carry it. 6 months passed. Winter gave way to spring, and Lucas's life continued its steady forward momentum. He and Sarah got engaged on a quiet Sunday morning in Prospect Park. Ethan serving as an enthusiastic witness. They were planning a small wedding for the fall, nothing elaborate, just family and close friends. Ethan was thriving, growing into himself with the kind of confidence that came from being genuinely loved and supported. He'd made the travel soccer team, maintained his obsession with space exploration, and had recently announced he wanted to learn guitar. Lucas's night classes were paying off. He'd been offered a management position at a different warehouse with significantly better pay and benefits. It would mean longer hours but more stability, the kind of foundation he could actually build a future on. Life was good. Really, genuinely good. And then one Saturday afternoon in May, Lucas was at the park with Ethan when he saw her. Iris was sitting on a bench reading a book, and she wasn't alone. Next to her was a woman about her age, laughing at something Iris had said. They looked comfortable together, the easy intimacy of genuine friendship. Lucas felt something loosen in his chest. Relief, maybe. Or vindication. She'd done it. She'd built a life that didn't revolve around him. Iris looked up and saw him watching. For a moment, they just looked at each other across the park. Then she smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes, and waved. Lucas waved back. Ethan tugged on his sleeve. "Dad, wasn't that Miss Iris?" "Yeah, buddy, it was." "Should we go say hi?" Lucas watched Iris turn back to her friend, watched them stand and walk away together, two people with somewhere to be that had nothing to do with him. "No," he said. "Let's let her be. She's got her own life now." "Do you miss her?" The question caught Lucas off guard. Sometimes, but missing someone doesn't mean you need them in your life. Sometimes it just means they were important to you for a while. Ethan thought about this seriously. Like how I miss my old house sometimes, but I like our new one better? Exactly like that. They went back to playing soccer, and Lucas tried not to think about the girl on the bench who'd once been the center of his complicated feelings. She was someone else's friend now, someone else's story. And that was okay. That evening, after Ethan was in bed, Lucas told Sarah about seeing Iris. "How did it feel?" she asked. "Okay, good, actually. She looked happy, like she'd figured some things out." "Are you glad you saw her?" "Yeah, it gave me closure I didn't know I needed." Sarah kissed him. "I love that you still care about whether she's okay. It's one of the things I love about you. Even though she's complicated?" "Everyone's complicated. You're complicated. I'm complicated. The difference is we're building something together instead of running from our complications." Lucas pulled her closer. "Have I mentioned lately that I'm really glad I met you?" "Not in the last hour. Very negligent of you." They laughed, and Lucas felt the contentment that came from being exactly where he needed to be. The wedding happened on a perfect October day, the kind where the light turned everything golden and the air had just enough bite to remind you summer was really over. Lucas stood at the altar watching Sarah walk toward him and thought about all the roads that had led him here. The divorce that had shattered his first attempt at building a family. The loneliness that had made him vulnerable to complicated connections. The restraint that had saved him from making choices he couldn't take back. And Iris. Always Iris, hovering at the edge of his story. The person who taught him that sometimes love meant saying no. The ceremony was simple and genuine. Ethan served as best man, taking his duties seriously in his too big suit. Lucas's parents flew in from Arizona, and Sarah's whole extended family filled the small venue with warmth and noise. During his vows, Lucas looked at Sarah and said, "You taught me that I'm allowed to want things for myself, that being a father doesn't mean erasing everything else about who I am, that partnership means sharing burdens instead of carrying them alone. I promise to keep learning those lessons every day." Sarah cried, and half the audience cried, and Lucas felt something settle deep in his chest. Certainty. The bone-deep knowledge that this was right. At the reception, during a quiet moment between toasts, Lucas's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I saw the wedding announcement in the paper. Congratulations. I'm really happy for you. You deserve all the good things. Iris." Lucas stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Thank you. I hope you're doing well." "I am. Really well, actually. Built a whole life I'm proud of. No longer need saving. You never did. You just needed to believe it. Always the wise one. Enjoy your day. You've earned it." Lucas pocketed his phone and looked around the reception. At Sarah dancing with Ethan, both of them laughing. At his parents talking with Sarah's family. At the life he'd built from the wreckage of everything that had fallen apart. He thought about the man who'd moved into that Brooklyn apartment 5 years ago, exhausted and broken and just trying to survive. That man would barely recognize the life Lucas had now. Sarah caught his eye from across the room and smiled, and Lucas felt it again. That quiet contentment that came from making the right choices even when they were hard. He'd said no to Iris all those years ago, and it had been the right call. Not because what they felt wasn't real, but because real feelings weren't enough when the timing was wrong and the circumstances impossible. They'd both survived. Both grown. Both built lives they were proud of. And maybe that was the truest form of love, caring enough about someone to protect them from yourself, to choose their future well-being over your present loneliness, to let them go so they could become who they needed to be. Lucas walked across the room to his wife, took her hand, and led her onto the dance floor. The music played, the celebration continued, and Lucas Reed, divorced father, warehouse manager, careful keeper of boundaries, allowed himself to be completely, perfectly happy. Not because everything had worked out the way he'd planned, but because he'd learned that sometimes the best endings came from having the courage to refuse the easy ones. Years from now, he'd think about that winter night in Brooklyn when a desperate young woman had asked him for something he couldn't give. He'd think about the restraint it had required, the pain of doing the right thing, the way loneliness could make people dangerous to each other. And he'd be grateful. Grateful for the strength to say no. Grateful for the wisdom to recognize that not all love deserved to be acted on. Grateful for the chance to build something real and lasting with someone who met him where he was instead of where he'd been. The song ended and Sarah leaned up to kiss him. "What are you thinking about?" "How lucky I am." Good answer. They danced until their feet hurt, celebrated until the venue staff started cleaning up around them, and drove home to start their new life with Ethan already asleep in the back seat. Lucas carried his son upstairs, tucked him into bed, and stood in the doorway watching him sleep the way he'd done 1,000 times before. "Thank you," he whispered, though he wasn't sure who he was thanking. The universe, maybe. Or the version of himself who'd been strong enough to make hard choices. Or Iris, for teaching him that restraint was its own kind of love. He turned off the light and went to bed with his wife, and dreamed of futures that were actually possible instead of just desperately wished for. And somewhere in Brooklyn, Iris Bennett fell asleep in her own apartment, surrounded by friends she'd made and a life she'd built, no longer searching for someone to save her because she'd finally learned to save herself. They'd both made it. Not together, but whole. And in the end, that was the only ending that mattered.